So, welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Tom Seager. I'm very, very interested in talking to Tom today for a lot of different reasons. He just sent me actually his first chapter of his first book. I just read it this morning. It's all about sex, love, and cold exposure. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here, Dr. Hart.
So, before we get started and we get into the details of the chapter that you sent me, can you just give the audience a little bit of a brief background about yourself?
Happy to. I'm an engineer. So sometimes people call me Dr. Seager because we're on campus and that's the tradition, but I don't want anybody to get confused. I don't have a medical degree or a medical background. I've been working in environmental engineering, circular economy, life cycle assessment, sustainability my entire career, which is getting to be 25 or 30 years. But I got interested in healthcare because when my son was 6 years old, this is back in the turn of the century, 2001, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I remember the phone call very well. Our pediatrician was our next door neighbor, and my wife was describing his symptoms, and he's got a fever and these flu-like symptoms, yada, yada, yada. And she says, and he's peeing a lot. And my neighbor, our pediatrician, says, meet me in the hospital right away. Your son has diabetes and your life is going to change. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. There were just all these feelings of shame and guilt and anxiety. Then we got to the hospital and they did the testing to confirm the over-the-phone diagnosis. And I remember my neighbor handed me an orange and a syringe. He said, nobody leaves the hospital until you figure this out. It's my job now to draw up the insulin, practice injecting it into the orange. And this is an experience that a million parents have had. It's a very vulnerable thing. But what I remember is figure this out. He was talking about the insulin syringe. There were no pumps or continuous glucose monitors at the time. And I was thinking about, I want to figure out like the whole thing. We started writing down his insulin demand, his exercise levels, his nutritional intake. And this is when I began to discover that almost everything they tell us about diet and nutrition is a lie, because I had the data in my son's journals about what happens to him when he eats protein and fat and carbohydrates, and how does exercise burn glucose. That was the beginning of what's now like a 20-something year journey into trying to understand for myself health, metabolism, diet, the way our bodies work. And you can probably guess it was all kicked into overdrive when we shut down the world for a mysterious virus that wasn't dangerous to children. But we locked them out of school, and then we started mandating vaccines. This created an enormous new skepticism in our healthcare institutions and the way that medicine is practiced, and a lot of interest in alternative approaches to, I'm going to call it wellness. I don't even want to call it health anymore. By that time, I was doing ice baths, and I understood better how the ice baths were activating brown fat, the importance of brown fat in the body, but I was just scratching the surface. You read the book chapter and you said accurately, it's about love and sex and romance and cold plunge, because it happened that there was another important transition in my life. At this point, my kids are grown up. My wife and I split. And you can imagine the difference in the dating world from when we met in the 90s to when we split in 20 years later. I got to figure out dating apps. I got to figure out relationships. I got to figure out how to drop 40 or 50 pounds and make myself attractive again. And all of this, like the inquisitive mind, came at the intersection of how do I make myself physically more attractive? How do I understand love and relationships? What happened to my marriage? And what the hell is going on in the world now that COVID is shutting it down? So this book chapter, you read a draft. It is summarizing the neurochemistry of love, the things that I had to learn about why did I pick my wife? Why did we separate at the time? What are the drives that brought me into that relationship? And trying to decode the connection between our minds and our bodies so that other guys don't have to go through the same 2 decades of research that I've been trying to go through.
Well, I think that's a good summary of what just happened, but and I really appreciate you mentioning all that. So I'm not sure where you wanted to start with that, Tom, but like in your book or in the chapter that you sent me, the draft anyway, you talk about these 3 different types of love, and that to me was something that drew my attention very quickly. And then you also backed it up with all these neurotransmitters and that kind of thing. So with regard to your story, I mean, I can understand exactly, how you're feeling and why you're feeling the way that you are, because, things have changed, drastically. I mean, I actually never got on a dating app myself just because, I had girlfriends a lot of the times. And then also too, they only came about like after I had became a doctor, and I just kind of thought it was, I guess, in my own eyes, a little bit like unprofessional to hit up the the dating apps.
Yep.
But but I understand that, like, it's a great way for people to meet. Like, I know I have friends who have met their spouses over dating apps, and now they're married and they're doing very well. So like, I think initially that was something that people sort of like dismissed, like back in like the maybe early 2000s. It was kind of like, oh, you met someone online, like you're a loser kind of thing. But now it
Yep.
seems like it's very, very acceptable. And in some ways too, like you almost get like the screening process like out of the way,
Yep.
which is good. So you can almost, be on maybe date 3 or 4 on your first date, instead of, having to get to know the person. Then you find out some red flag, later,
Yep.
so I can see how it could be potentially useful. But yeah, just like,
The stigma has largely been removed. Maybe not for people of my generation. Now I'm, 57 years old. I was born in the 60s. And so there's a big transition in technology over my lifetime. But for, my daughter, for younger people, I don't think there's anywhere near as much as stigma. But at the time that I got, I was self-conscious. I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. I had lost a lot of weight. And but my self-image hadn't really caught up with my improvement. And dating women, I'm going out on with the
Can we just
women I
go
meet
back to
on the
that?
dating
Just
app.
can we go back to that point just for one second? Because you
Yeah.
said that you had, because I think that's an important point. You said that you had like done some of this like self-improvement, yet
Yeah.
you didn't feel that your confidence was elevated from that self-improvement. Is that kind of what you
You might be
experienced?
familiar with the term imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter
Okay,
syndrome.
so
I know that very well. Yeah.
I had to read a lot about it because I was suffering from it. All growth
And just tell
is
everyone what imposter syndrome is, but maybe before you. Yeah.
this is when the rest of the world perceives you in a way that you don't believe yourself. So they're looking at it and you're saying, oh, he's so handsome. Oh, he's so smart. Oh, he's so successful. And inside you feel ugly and stupid and like a failure. There's a discrepancy between the reality that other people see and your own internal self-image. In college, this happens to a lot of students at elite schools. They can't believe they got into Harvard or, whatever the most exclusive school is. And they get there and they feel like maybe somebody made a mistake and shouldn't have really let them in. Maybe the admissions office didn't really see who they were. And in a college setting, students suffer from imposter syndrome because their self-image is not consistent with the way the rest of the world is assessing their aptitude for study. But everyone is vulnerable to imposter syndrome at a time in their life when they're growing exponentially. They're moving so fast, challenging themselves, acquiring new skills, improving their life. But the way our brain works, it doesn't understand exponential growth. It only understands linear extrapolation. We're good, sometimes at fractions or at straight lines. But what we're not good is exponential growth. This happens to a lot of teenagers in puberty. One day you wake up and you're 3/4 of an inch taller than you were, when you went to bed. Things are changing so fast. Your body doesn't know where your hands are, your feet are. You need to get reacquainted with your new body because your self-image is very different than the reality that everyone else perceives. That gap is called imposter syndrome. And congratulations if you're feeling it. It only happens when you are growing, changing in some exponential way that your self-image can't catch up. So when I separated from my wife, I was, 250 pounds. I was still wearing glasses. I had no sense of charisma, and I had to lose a lot of weight. I went on what I call the great food diet. I decided I wasn't going to eat unless it was great, unless it was nutrient dense and delicious. And so I started skipping all the faculty lunches and the donuts and the pizza that we have on campus for these meetings. Just wasn't going to eat it. I was inadvertently doing intermittent fasting, but I just called it meal skipping. Weight started coming off. I took some pictures. I went online. I looked pretty good, but I didn't feel like I looked pretty good. And the insecurities I still had about myself, they were no good for my dating life, because that discordance, when people sense the discordance between the reality and your own sort of self-perception, there's something either untrustworthy about it or unreliable about it. So I had a lot of catching up to do.
So how did you fill that gap?
The only way to see myself in more accurately is to use relationships as a mirror. How do other people see me? How do they look at me? What do they see? And it's very difficult to get that kind of feedback. I was fortunate to have a mentor who was pretty good at his pep talk. He was also very good at his direct criticism. But he would say, give yourself some credit here. Take a look at yourself as if you weren't from the inside. I had an experience on the dating app. My wife called me up and she said, "Who is Harold something or other?" And she was really angry. Like, I have no idea. And she said, "Nuh-uh, I saw you on Match or, whatever the hell the site was, and you're using a pseudonym, and, I understand we're separated and that, you can be on dating apps and everything, but why are you making up an identity? This is outrageous." I had no idea. She sent me to the site. Somebody lifted my picture off the internet, put it up on a website, and made a fake profile, like catfishing or whatever it's called, to try and see who would be attracted. Called my mentor up. He goes, "Tom, people on the internet do some crazy things."
And people on the internet now, they're going to be making up AI generated images. They're not even going to have to even take someone else out.
Right.
It's crazy what can be done these days. And I think that's going to be, I don't want to go down the AI rabbit hole, but that is going to cause, a lot of tension and problems for people.
Dang thing, Doc.
I don't know if there was a Drake song, actually. Again, I don't want to get too off topic, that went like viral like a couple weeks ago. I guess it was AI generated, and I'm not really sure what happened, but I imagine he's not too pleased about that. But yeah, just to kind of
the incident sort of changed my self-perception a little bit.
Yeah.
Now I'm still no Instagram model, but it helped convince me that I was fine, that all of these insecurities that had partly undermined my marriage, they weren't really me, that I was better than I thought, and I was worth something. It helped restore my self-esteem because I was getting signals from other places that I was attractive enough, I was charismatic enough, this was all going to work out. But the anecdote I wanted to share is that I was dating a woman. We're still dating now. This is years ago, pre-COVID. We'd started the ice bath company. I was dating this woman I met online. She's a former model. She, walked the runway when she was younger. Beautiful, and she's accustomed to photo shoots. She's got a great aesthetic sense. And I said, "Would you go up to Sedona? We're going to take some ice bath pictures together. Beautiful backdrop, this is for marketing." And she said, yes, she would. We got into an enormous fight before, on the drive up there. And it's 2 hours from Phoenix, and it's miserable and wretched. And I hate this. And why did I even invite her? And my daughter is the photographer for this. And I'm like, what have I done? And then we get in the ice bath, and all of those negative feelings and the conflict, and it all melted away. For the photography, we had an idea of what we wanted to do. And even so, she was pissed at me and I was pissed at her. She's got this sense of commitment and professionalism. And so we take hands and we get into the ice and we lock into one another's eyes and we're breathing together. Everything melted away. All the animosity, the resentment, the contempt about whatever imaginary grievance I was carrying, I was locked into her, and we had a great weekend in Sedona. She brought her daughter, I brought mine. We're hiking, and I'm like, there is something going on here. I had to go into the literature, and you said
And at that point, Tom, not to interrupt you, at that point, had you only done ice baths on your own and
Correct.
had no,
Yep.
and you didn't have any kind of understanding of what ice baths
None.
as a couple could do together? Okay,
You
so
got
go
it.
ahead.
This was it was kind of an accident, and the contrast between the way I felt about her in the relationship before we got in and the way I felt about her as soon as we got out, it couldn't be ignored. It was such a strong signal. I felt bonded. I felt attracted. I felt like this is the love of my life, right? And there's a very dangerous attitude for a man in a vulnerable state. But I had to figure out what was going on. It turns out that, I'm reading Helen Fisher, and I'm reading Tim Burkhead, and I'm reading David Buss. I'm reading all this anthropology research about evolutionary biology, about attraction. Yeah, 3 different dimensions. And this is all Evo Bio. There are 3 different sexual selection mechanisms. The first one is lust, and that's testosterone. When your testosterone goes up, this feeling of lust, and this is men and women. A lot of people don't realize that testosterone is the dominant sex hormone in women. Healthy women have maybe 3 times as much testosterone as they have estrogen, and they don't know, because if they get a lab report, the testosterone and the estrogen are reported in different chemical units. You have to do a unit conversion to realize that women have women have a lot less testosterone than men, but they have more testosterone than estrogen. And testosterone is the lust hormone. Comes with a lot of other things that are very positive when it's endogenous and produced naturally. And it turns out that the ice bath, when you follow it up with just light exercise, will drive your testosterone through the roof. The women might not need exercise because there's only one study. They did cold stimulation. They didn't do any exercise. This is on young women, premenopausal, and they got a big testosterone boost. So what does that do for the libido? What does that do for body composition? It's all very healthy. But in men, it's clear that ice bath, then some light exercise will boost testosterone. If you do it the other way around, you will suppress testosterone. So here we are, we do the ice bath, and testosterone is like coursing through my bloodstream. Well, of course I'm feeling lustful. Of course I'm feeling, attracted to her. And the same thing is likely happening to her. As far as the chemistry of lust, the ice bath was activating it in us both. But that's only one sexual selection mechanism. And almost everyone could draw a connection between libido and reproductive success. Human beings, though, we're difficult, vulnerable creatures. We birth out these little babies. They don't even know how to walk. I mean, even a giraffe baby knows how to walk. Human babies, they know how to swim when they're born, but they don't know how to walk. They can't take care of themselves. There's a very long period by which before they can become independent. So there's another sexual selection drive, and it's what we might call romantic love.
So that's the second one. So for people listening, there's 3 big ones. The first one is lust. The second one is romantic, and I'll let Tom finish everything and give you guys.
The third one is like familial attachment, and it's got nothing to do with sex. We'll get there. The romantic one is this possessive, jealous love. It is where mate guarding comes from. It's the idea. It happens when you have a crush on somebody. You can experience lust without having this obsessive crush. And you want to possess this person, make them yours and yours alone. And there's another drive, because raising human babies requires a commitment from more than just the mom, from all kinds of people to provide the protein that she needs and the protection that she needs. That possessive drive in a man that says, this is mine, this is my child, this is my lover, will motivate the man to put himself at risk, whether it's hunting or it's combat or whatever it is. It also has sort of the downside. Jealousy is a sexual selection mechanism, but we also know that it can motivate us to do some horrible things, take some horrible risks. In the woman, a similar kind of thing. She can have the same neurochemistry. This is a dopamine hit, a norepinephrine hit, all of which are produced in the ice bath. And it causes her to attach obsessively to a single individual in a way that likely improves the success of the offspring. We have gone the 2 dimensions. And we know that ice bath and exercise, big testosterone lust boost. It also creates this huge, we're talking 2 or 3x boost in dopamine and norepinephrine. And these are the romantic love hormones. One of the things about romantic love is you cannot be depressed and be in romantic love at the same time. The 2 are incompatible. And we probably know this, even if from movies, but from our own experience, we feel on cloud 9. I'm thinking, it's 8th grade and you pass that note to that girl, do you like me? Yes or no? And when it comes back, yes, you're like, all your worries in the world.
It's your whole world. It's your whole world. Everything's perfect.
You can't be depressed when you have this rush of dopamine and norepinephrine. And there's some really good studies coming out of the United Kingdom that use winter swimming, so cold exposure, for treatment of depression. It's an incredibly successful kind of protocol, and partly because it's outdoors and partly because it's social, but you get that huge boost in dopamine, you feel great. I'm getting this huge boost in dopamine when I'm with her. The third one, familial attachment. This is pre-sexual, that's a non-sexual. When a kid goes to, I don't know, you're in the cafeteria and the kid's like, oh, I love ketchup. And then maybe you remember, like, some other kid's going to be like, if you love ketchup so much, why don't you marry it? Kids in my elementary school were merciless, but it points to the different ways, like love has multiple meanings. The child can love a toy or love a pet, and it's got nothing to do with this kind of sexual, the child's not sexual in that way. And when we think of sexual selection, we often get them all wrapped up in romance. But this familial attachment, it is what bonds the family together or the tribe together. They care about things. There's a sense of spirituality, religious sacredness that comes out of this. And it's a different type of motivation than the sex motivation. So we can say, I love my brother. We could say, I love my cousin. All 3 dimensions of love hitting together, and you get some great relationships. You can have a great marriage. Mine, I got fat. There goes my wife's lust. I wasn't the guy that she would look at and say, he's hot, because I was fat and ugly. We weren't having the kind of novel experiences together that would give us that dopamine hit. But when I got up to Sedona with this woman that I met on the dating app, and she's all beautiful, and part of me is like, oh, she's out of my league, and I'm carrying all these insecurities, and partly those are part of the resentments in the relationship, and all that melts away. We're really onto something. The neurochemistry of familial attachment is different. Vasopressin, it's oxytocin. Oxytocin is the same bonding hormone that a woman who is breastfeeding her infant, is expressed when she's breastfeeding. It's that caretaking and protective hormone. When you mix it up with a little of the testosterone, the oxytocin, it's not a peace, love, and spirituality thing. It can also motivate you to attack, to defend. Oxytocin is the mama bear protecting the cubs. So I don't want to give people the wrong idea, but this familial attachment is another way that we think about love, and it's non-sexual and it's very powerful. All 3 working together when we ice bath together, we breathe together, we stare into one another's eyes. So to figure this out, I'm going deeper into the literature of love. And at the same time, there was this journalist in New York, and she's running a study. And it has, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's like, the 40 questions that will make you fall in love with a stranger. She's written a book about it. These increasingly intimate questions that create the same neurochemistry of, it turns out that when you're in love, you get a big testosterone boost. when you're in lust, I should be specific. When you're in this, when you got a crush, you get a big dopamine and norepinephrine boost. And we know that the chemistry comes from the feelings, but it turns out that if you create the chemistry first, you will have the feelings. These two are so interlocked. Same thing when you, I don't know, you go on a
Okay,
roller
so
coaster.
let's just maybe go over the three big
Yeah.
categories again, though, because I know that you have a lot to say about it. I just want to stop you there just for a
I'm
moment.
glad you're interrupting.
So with lust, like that's basically when you have an ultimate desire for someone, and that's mostly governed by testosterone
You got it.
altogether. And
Yep.
that doesn't have anything necessarily to do with love. You're just basically trying to satisfy a sexual urge that you have.
Correct.
And Sigmund Freud, I remember him saying, people only have two reasons, only do anything for two reasons. One is to feel important or to satisfy a sexual urge. And in some ways, I do feel that that's somewhat accurate. But so we have
He's
lust
wrong. I mean, those two things exist, but it
yeah.
turns out people are more complicated than that.
Okay, let's just get back to the three though. So we have the lust, and then again, that's going to be covered. That's going to be dominated more by testosterone, and then we're going to have the romantic love, and that's more of the possessive love. Like you want someone to just be yours. You don't want them to be anyone else's. And then in this instance, the neurotransmitters involved are going to be more dopamine and norepinephrine. Correct?
Yep.
And then when you look at the last one, the familial one, then it seems that the dominant neurotransmitters are oxytocin and vasopressin. And this seems to be more of a caring thing. But as you said too, like, Mama Bear and her cubs, it's like, okay, so she cares so much about her cubs that she's going to do anything to make sure that they're not attacked. And so I think that's very interesting point that you make there. And
sometimes
so
oxytocin is called the cuddle hormone, and it comes from this image of breastfeeding. It's wonderful, but it has a dark side too. And that's all I'm pointing out, is that is a protective instinct to care for a specific, in this case, an infant. And you don't want to cross Mama Bear.
So just a couple questions about that. So everyone kind of talks about the honeymoon phase, the first 3 months of the relationship, maybe 6 months for people where, basically they're having sex all the time or very, very frequently. That happens to, I think that's pretty common in a lot of relationships. Then, once the honeymoon phase passes, people start to have less sex towards one another. So in that sort of 3-month period, maybe 6-month period, we'll call it, it seems like people then would probably have higher levels of testosterone, and maybe they are in fact in love. I'm not saying that they aren't, but it seems to be that lust would be the most dominant type of love during this stage. Would that be pretty accurate? And then
I think that happens to a lot of people. Yeah.
And then the other thing, this is kind of comes up a lot, I find, is that and it seems to relate to the lust stage, but also to the romantic and familiar one, is that a lot of couples will say that as they grow older, and sometimes it happens earlier, even after 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, they stop making out. So what is it about, like, couples where, like, they'll still have sex and they'll make out maybe during sex, or they'll kiss during sex, but they don't kiss like that when they're not having sex? Is that something that you can explain?
I don't have experience myself. I'm a very touchy-feely guy. Touch is probably my #1 love language, if you're into that.
One of the 5 love languages.
Yeah.
And maybe we should go over them super quick, because I think they are important. So we have physical touch. We have
words of affirmation.
Words of affirmation.
You're doing great, honey.
Doing what is it, when I forget what he calls it, when acts of service. Acts of service. And then there's gifts is another one.
Yes.
And then the last one might have to help me out on. I'm not do you know it?
I don't know. Maybe Toronto Mike can look it up for us. I only keep track of the ones that are important to me and my girlfriend.
Okay. Okay,
But
yeah,
you,
I know there's five, but anyway,
yep.
we got four. Maybe the fifth one will come to me in a second. Um, yeah, kind of interesting how those can be, correlated and linked into the three types of love that you're discussing. But like, do you have any explanation as to why people may kind of, stop like kissing each other or making out as they grow older with couples? And do you think it maybe has to do with like a drop in oxytocin, or what do you think is the best explanation there?
Testosterone levels in the industrialized world tend to decline with age. In men, there's some really good studies about dads, men in committed relationships. Testosterone comes down because our body is stimulated to express testosterone in response to experiences that we have in the environment. If you, I'm going to use a kind of what seems like an absurd example. You're playing video games and you defeat the last screen and you win, you get a boost in testosterone. This idea of the competition and the victory boosts your testosterone because it's stimulated by the experiences and environmental cues. When a man is in a committed monogamous relationship, especially when he has kids, testosterone declines. So it would be reasonable to expect that the man has less lust. Now, in women, it's a little bit different. In men, testosterone is produced in the testes. The testes are held outside the body where they got to stay a little bit cooler than normal body temperature to work optimally. But in women, the testosterone is produced in the ovaries, and the ovaries are held inside the body. They operate a little bit differently when it comes to temperature. So why would the women's testosterone begin to decline? It turns out that there's a relationship between metabolism and testosterone, and it's different for men than it is for women. Metabolically, reproduction is very demanding and more demanding on women than it is in men. When women become insulin resistant, for example, when they're eating too many carbohydrates and the cell walls that house the mitochondria become resistant to the action of insulin. Insulin is the hormone that will transport glucose from the bloodstream into the cell where it is processed by the mitochondria. And I only know this because I had to learn it for my son's diabetes diagnosis. When you become insulin resistant, it is the cells of your body trying to protect the mitochondria from the damage of being overworked by the glucose. The body is essentially saying, we're going to park this glucose in the bloodstream. It's not good. It's damaging, but it's even worse if we were allowed the glucose into the cell to overwork the mitochondria. Mitochondria have their own DNA, which blew my mind. They need their own DNA at the site of the mitochondria to synthesize enzymes for energy production so that we can go from 0 to 60 instantaneously. They can't wait for the DNA in the nucleus to do it. They have their own DNA, and when they're overworked by glucose, that DNA is subject to damage from something called reactive oxygen species. When women become insulin resistant, it affects the metabolism of the ovaries. The single most dominant reason for women of childbearing age to be infertile is called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it is so closely associated with insulin resistance that there's a suggestion there's a cause-effect relationship. If you
Well, I always test whenever someone has PCOS, I always test their hemoglobin A1C, which is
and
just
what do you
measurement
find?
of the oftentimes it is elevated.
Yep.
Oftentimes it definitely is elevated. Yeah. So
If you
not
fix the
not good.
metabolism, some good animal model studies have resolved PCOS, and these are rats or they're mice, and then in which they had induced the PCOS, and then they become fertile. Not only is their regular menses restored, but then they have pups. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that the same thing is true in women. But here's the irony. PCOS, because these cysts impinge upon the ovaries, it causes overproduction of testosterone. The weird thing is that the metabolic disorder in men can reduce testosterone production in the testes, but it can cause this aberrant boost in testosterone in the woman. Because it's insulin resistance, that's also associated with obesity. The women who suffer this often have very low self-esteem. The testosterone is messing with their self-image of femininity. They're gaining weight. They don't feel sexy, even though testosterone is coursing through their bloodstream. You fix the metabolism, and you will correct their testosterone and boost their self-esteem. Weight will start to come off, and reproductively, they're healthier. That changes their outlook and their orientation towards men. So the reasons for testosterone to move with age in men and women are different, and they can move in opposite directions.
But just
Go
to
ahead.
stop you there just for a sec with regards to the testosterone in men, like because you're saying that testosterone is associated with lust. So do you think though there's almost, I'm a big advocate of keeping your testosterone levels, high. So
Me too.
I just want to, preface that. But do you think that there's some maybe potential biological mechanism where, testosterone is decreasing as we age because it's not good for a male to lust other women when they're already committed?
I disagree.
Again, I am someone who, thinks that, testosterone should be elevated. You should try to maximize it because, it does so much for your overall
Absolutely.
well-being and that kind of thing. But, I could see how somebody could make an argument that, as testosterone decreases, we have less lust. And then because we want to be committed to our partner that we have, we're going to have less testosterone, less lust for others.
It doesn't sound right to me. And this might be a politically incorrect argument, but I'm going to refer you to Tim Burkhead's work. He studies birds and ants and things, and then he draws inferences and applies it to human beings. He wrote a book called, with controversial title, Sperm Competition. And he pointed out the difference between female sexual selection pressures and male sexual selection pressures. The ideal, sex life for a man is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality with as many partners as possible. And when we're talking evolutionarily, it's because there's such a small metabolic investment in each ejaculation. This sort of shotgun approach is that when we're talking about lust, is the ideal realization of the man's testosterone fantasies. Now, that doesn't mean that men don't have other drives, the drives to bond, the familial attachment, the romantic, the possessive love. They do, but it's different for women. The book is called Sperm Competition because the ideal for women that would move them towards promiscuity is to obtain the best genetic material that they can. And one of the ways that that happens outside human civilization, so we're going to talk about the animal kingdom, one of the ways that happens is for the female to copulate with multiple males and let the sperm sort it out inside her own reproductive tract. This does happen in not in our Western civilized culture, not in a culturally approved way, but it does happen in human beings too. And so there can be a drive to obtain the best possible genetic material or inside a woman by mating with multiple men. Then
So
she's got
that
the
would
other problem to
explain
solve.
then like the when people use the term like gold digger, what basically like what women are designed to do is to find the best mate that's going to be able to protect them and provide for them for the rest of their life. And so obviously one of the things that they're going to be attracted to then is someone who has a lot of resources or someone who's very wealthy. So I think that must be the reason why again some women appear to be like again gold diggers or whatever that the term that people.
But it's very difficult for a woman to find both the best genetic material and the commitment and resources that she needs to raise the children. It didn't used to be. Go back to hunter-gatherer, pre-agricultural. The man who was the best hunter was genetically stronger, faster, smarter, and he could provide the most meat. There's a wonderful, there's a mate selection for you, and it's all packed up in how good is he with a spear, But in modern society, money, this abstract concept that we have to teach our children to get their heads around, because there's no intuitive evolutionary understanding of money. Money is the principal resource. So the man with the best genetic material, those might come from physiological cues, his appearance, his scent, his gait, his posture, his social status, sure. But the ability to commit, willingness to commit and provide resources, that might be in his gold card or in his car.
Okay. So that would also then maybe explain, in terms of when women are looking to, get the best genetic match that they can find. So, they want someone who can provide resources and that kind of thing. But you also were just talking about, hunting, right? And so it's still built into them also to look for
Correct.
physical attributes, right? So dominant
Yep.
physical attributes, which is
Got it.
why, women may still be more, attracted to men with, broad shoulders or like a
Yep.
V shape or like that kind of thing. So ideally, like what you're kind of, getting at is that, if you're a woman, you're going to be looking for someone who can provide resources and also someone who, looks somewhat physically dominant or physically
Yep.
capable. And then if you're a man, then, that would maybe explain why, we do see, younger women sometimes, shacking up with older men, for their money kind of thing. But the older man is not really well built. They may not be
Yep.
that physically attractive, and then therefore the interest just kind of diminishes after some time because it seems like you're explaining is that they need both. They
Yep.
need both the resourcefulness and also to the physical dominance.
You got it. And I'm not making any moral judgments. People aren't going to believe me when I say that. These are
Yeah, again,
evolutionary
I'm not
drives.
saying this is the way it should be, or I'm
Exactly.
not saying anything like, bad about women or anything bad about men or anything bad about how, people are attracted to one another in relationships. I'm just talking about, evolutionary biology with you. And, this seems to be, how we typically mate.
You got it. The thing about my marriage is I was failing my wife on two of the three drives that we call love. I was failing on the lust. I was failing on the romance. All we had left was the familial attachment of the house and the kids. It was like we were running a small business or something, and we weren't even financially very successful. She she had a right to be dissatisfied with me
And
because after
I think sorry, I don't mean to interrupt there too,
yeah,
but I think that it's really important for men to understand that like women should shame you when you're doing something wrong. Like we've gotten too
I'm
soft in
not saying
society
shame.
about
It's
that. I
criticism, critique is okay,
I
but
am. I
shame is
think
bad.
that there should be at least some of that because that's what's going to initiate you to act differently. Like if you do something bad or you feel guilty about someone, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a like romantic relationship. But if you do something bad and you feel guilty, like that guilt is there so that you don't do that again.
Correct.
So I think that like if you're doing something incorrect and then your wife, your girlfriend, fiance says something that I mean I'm going to use the word shame, but maybe there's a better word to use, does something that makes you feel a little bit inferior, but then those feelings of inferiority spark you up to get better, then it's a win-win for both because she gets what she wants and then you're improving yourself so you get what you want.
What a lot of people miss is that sexual reproduction is not cooperative. Marriage is cooperative, but sexual reproduction, because men and women have different idealized sexual states, it requires compromise. One or the other will have to give up their ideal to make a cooperative relationship work. Evolutionarily, sexual reproduction is competitive between the sexes and intersex. When you use shame, it's very dangerous. I'm not going to recommend that any woman use shame in her relationship. Critique is different from shame. She might have a perspective, she might have feelings, she might have things to share. Shame is a manipulation that is used to try and control behavior. We shame our kids. It's terrible, but we do it. If we didn't have shame, we probably wouldn't have civilization. So I'm on the right track, or I see kind of where you're going with this, but that's what you and I have a friendship for. Don't, women don't shame your men. If your man has good friends who lead successful lives, they let him know when he's screwed up. And they do it,
Mhm.
hopefully, without shame. For example, I've got sons. And sometimes I remember one came back with a speeding ticket, 92 and a 55. Now he was 17 years old. What the hell? You can imagine like I might have had a tantrum and I might have said, "You're an idiot. You're never driving
That's
again."
fast.
Instead, I said 92. I goes, "Yeah, I was doing 105 when I got the same kind of, I was 23. I was an idiot. And yeah, you're in trouble." He doesn't need to be shamed. He knows he screwed up. And I get to say, when I made that mistake in my life, I did a driver's ed course, state reduced the charges. I didn't need an attorney, but I consulted with one. Let's explore those options for you. Now, we're feeling like we're on the same team. We're feeling some of that oxytocin bond. We're feeling the familial attachment. He doesn't need shame. He feels ashamed already. Men who have strong male-to-male relationships will help them course correct around their mistakes. They do not need to be shamed by women. Shame is what drives men to suicide. It's terrible. I hate seeing it because male suicide rates are going through the roof. They're already 4 or 5 times that of female. And we have an enormous mental health crisis right now in both Canada and the United States. So this is why I'm disagreeing. I want men to have those male relationships. They listen to critique, they get the multiple perspectives, and it is okay to say, I really screwed that up. And hopefully you got guys in your life who said, well, yeah, you did. Here's 3 things that I've done in a similar situation that did or didn't work for me. And it's okay to sometimes, you got to apologize. You got to say, I made a mistake.
I think I may have, I don't know if misspoke is the word, or maybe just misunderstood the difference between, shame and critique. I think that you can induce behavior change without necessarily making someone like feel bad, but also too, I don't think that like all feelings of inferiority are necessarily bad if they can
Agreed.
prompt you to, make behavior changes that improve your overall self. I think that's important.
Between jealousy and envy. Jealousy is when you think somebody's taken something that belongs to you and you're angry about it. Envy is when you see somebody else has got something you want. And you don't think that's my car, that's my house, that's my girlfriend. You don't think that. You say, I want some of what he's got. And that can be very motivating for people. You might still be kind of angry at them that they've got something that but instead of trying to make that a moral failing in them, you can say, I want to drive a car like that. I want to have a house like that. What do I got to do? I think I got to switch jobs. I think I got, or I think I got to start a side hustle. Envy and jealousy are very powerful drives, but they're different kinds of things. And I don't want to knock envy.
Okay, that's a real good point. I understand now the difference between jealousy and envy, and I think that's important for people to highlight. One question I had for you, and I think I may know how you're going to answer this, but do you think that there's something called unconditional love? Do you believe in that?
Yep.
You do. Okay. But so my argument, like I understand, where people are coming from with this, but my argument to that is that, like, you said that when you met your wife, and I know a little bit more about you than, the audience, just because I read that chapter of the book. Like, you met your life, you seem to be, I guess you could say, like a good prospective husband sort of thing. And then later on, you turned out to, you said you had added a lot of weight, you weren't, where you thought you were going to be financially. And so, all these things kind of, came to the forefront. Then eventually, unfortunately, you end up separating. But
I should point out, I'm doing better now, Mike.
Yeah, I know. I didn't mean to frame it like that. But in terms of that, like, like, you got to have some type of expectation on the other person to maintain, who
Right.
they were at the beginning, towards they are later. Meaning that, like, of course people are going to change. Of course people are going to evolve, and the key is you want to evolve together. But the thing is, like, if you are, a catch, for, lack of a better phrase, at the beginning of the relationship, and then you sort of, don't do anything, and eventually at the end of the relationship, or in the middle of the relationship, you become someone completely different. I mean, and then the person falls out of love with you. I mean, you can't really fault the person for that. And
Agreed.
so that's would be like the argument against that, like, unconditional love. It's like, I love you unconditionally, but, like, if you can change into a completely different person, then, how am I supposed to love you? Because I fell in love with a different person.
And that's not unconditional love. When a baby's brought into this world, it's helpless. It has no agency. It's biologically, I'm going to say it is entitled to unconditional love. Not all the babies get it, but because it has no agency in this world, you can't place conditions on it. Oh, I would love you if you didn't poop your diaper. It doesn't make any sense. As the baby matures and eventually into an adult, then there's no such thing as unconditional love. Unconditional love is a romantic fantasy that, gets sold to people at the rate of $17.95 a book, as if we're all looking for unconditional love, as if we're entitled to it. And that fantasy is very damaging. However, there are so many of us that did not experience the unconditional love as infants or in early childhood, that biologically our brains and our bodies were built to expect, that we do wind up seeking to fill in a hole that developed somewhere in our early childhood. And this often drives what we call chemistry. We've been talking a lot about the neural chemistry of love. What we haven't said is how trauma drives that chemistry. I can create dopamine in you with an ice bath, but there's sometimes that chemistry with a member of the opposite sex. Wow, we really clicked. There's a theory, Harvell Hendrix is probably most responsible for popularizing it, called imago. We carry around in our imagination the image of the grown-ups, the caretakers who hurt us when we were young. And maybe they hurt us through abuse, maybe they hurt us through neglect. Maybe they just because people are imperfect, they just hurt us with no malintent. But we carry around this developmental gap, the image of the person who was supposed to care for us, who hurt us in childhood, and we want to go find a facsimile of that person in our romantic adult lives. And we enter a power struggle. So one aspect of the power struggle is these two different idealized sexual strategies. But the other aspect of the power struggle is called the compulsion to repeat, which goes right back to Freud, that we're going to resolve our trauma by reliving it from a position of control. Let me explain what that looks like in a more innocent setting. Your daughter goes to the dentist and she has a filling done and is very uncomfortable and it's anxious for her. And she comes back, and what does she want to do? She wants to play Dolly. And Dolly's got to go to the dentist, but the daughter never plays the patient. She's replaying the stressful experience from the position of the dentist. She will say, okay, Dolly, you have to be still. This is going to hurt a little bit. We're just going to do. And the Dolly says, no, that's not true. When the daughter replays in her imagination the traumatic experience from the position of control, she resolves the experience. She has the memories without the emotions. Many of us go into our adult lives and our romantic relationships carrying these unresolved traumas from childhood. We impose them or project them onto our romantic partners in an attempt to control the relationship and get from our romantic partners the love we didn't get as children that our development really required. Now this is an enormous power struggle because he's got unresolved trauma and the only way to do it is from a position of control. She's got unresolved trauma and the only way to do it is a position of control. And the two are just in one massive power struggle, building up resentment and contempt. You didn't heal my childhood trauma. So how do you get around that? One way is to lift it up to consciousness. And this happened with a friend of mine. He also re-entered the dating pool, but it was because his wife was killed in a car wreck. And so he went through a very similar thing at a similar age, but for different reasons. And he met a woman who had a higher level of understanding. When he brought some of the grief that he experienced to her, she was very tender with him. And she saw some of the issues that he was going to have to work through. She said, who do you need me to be? Let's play act this. I will be her, who in whatever way she hurt you. And whatever you need from me in this moment, we will role play through it. There's a chapter in Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And it's the last chapter. He talks about
that book. Yeah, go ahead.
Great book. He talks about improvisational theater. I thought maybe because you've done EMDR, you've done ketamine and psilocybin, and you have a lot in your podcast about trauma. Bessel van der Kolk is on the leading edge of things that work for trauma resolution. And at the last chapter, he says, well, you know, my son signed up for this improv theater thing. And it was kind of a club. And I was kind of curious. I went to go see it. And I was like, holy crap, there are therapeutic applications here. It is the least well-developed chapter in the entire book, if you ask me. And maybe that's why he saved it for last. But there is a mode of therapy in which you replay the trauma under the supervision of a therapist from a position of control and resolve the traumatic event by coming to a different outcome. What I mean by resolution is you still have the memories, but resolving it convinces your psyche somehow that you have the control, that if you're confronted with this situation again, you've practiced and you're ready for it and you no longer need to be anxious about it. So it releases the emotions from the memory. And too many people are going through their relationships. They lose the lust, they lose these other forms of attraction because they're getting pushed out by the contempt and the resentment that they have over this power struggle of trauma. One way to let that go is to make an agreement. For this scene, in this setting, I'm relinquishing control, not through the whole relationship, but and I think that I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I think that what people do with BDSM and some sexual role play is unwittingly setting that stage, making those formal agreements, working on trauma that they might not even be conscious of. If they're able to lift it to a conscious level, just like Dolly with, you know, the daughter and the dentist and completely non-sexual setting, they might find that some of the emotions and the drives resolve themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, you know, too much about that topic. I know a little bit because I had a girl, Nicole Hodges, on here a few times before, and she's right into sorry, I forget the BDMS or whatever it's called. Sorry, I forgot for a sec. And psychedelics, and like, you know, it's something that's like, you know, it's very foreign to me, and you know, I'm also too you know, a physician, so I like to see, you know, randomized controlled trials and all that kind of thing. But you know, I can say anecdotally that it seems like she is helping a lot of different people, and so it's interesting that you brought that up. Like I didn't, you know, think that would be something that would come up today, but you know, we know that they exist. You know, like I'm watching a show now called Vikings, and Count Odo, and that was whipping some girl in it, and then, you know, she starts whipping him at the end of it. I won't give away the whole thing in case people haven't watched the show, but you know, I know that has existed for a long time, and it must have existed for some type of reason. And then, you know, I guess you're saying that, you know, there may actually, as silly as it and crazy it sounds to say, there may actually be some healing processes in that particular method, I guess, of sexual intercourse.
I think there's a lot of trauma repetition. It even happens in talk therapy, where people they sort of lay down the trauma tracks, and in talk therapy you can re-experience the trauma without any resolution, and the trauma becomes deeper, more hardwired into your behaviors and into your epigenome because you're reliving it without the resolution. To resolve, you've got, I'm going to say you've got to, because I don't know any other way. You've got to raise it to a conscious level. You've got to do this with the intention of resolving the trauma, and you have to be afforded the control, the experimental space to find out what is going to release those emotions.
And so, and again, I don't want to stay on this too long. I know we only have a couple minutes left here, but you know, would that mean that, say, if someone felt like they were not in control when they were younger, does that mean that they would be the one who would want to be the dominant one when they're older? And
Yes.
then the reverse, I guess, would be as well, as that if they felt like they were the dominant one when they were younger, they would want to be submitted when they were older.
Okay. I can really only speak for myself.
Okay.
My thing, and I've only recently resolved this, is fear of abandonment, like catastrophic existential fear of abandonment. I didn't know where this was coming from. And I got on ancestry.com, and, you know, I started doing the whole family tree. Turns out my grandfather, my mother's father, well, he was 8 years old when his father died. He was the youngest in the family. And I'm named for my grandfather. I mean, in some ways I identify with him. But gosh, if your dad was 8, in 1919 or whatever the year was when he died, you might go through your life with a fear of abandonment. It turns out that trauma can be epigenetically passed down to the next generation.
Oh
My
yeah,
mother can
generational
inherit.
trauma. I really
Got
believe
it.
in that. They've even shown that in rats before.
Exactly right. And it can be like
It's
7
crazy.
generations.
Yeah.
I could be carrying trauma for things I didn't even experience. I put a picture of my grandfather up, and it was when he was a very young boy with his older brother. Put it up on my bedroom wall. I said, Granddad, I mean, he's long passed away. I said, I got you. I'll never leave you. I created this story in my head, and it's all in my imagination that I would never leave my granddad, at least in his spirit. Because in my imagination, I'm like, if I can go back and heal that little boy's fear of abandonment, maybe I heal my own. Now, I've also put up a picture of myself as a young boy. And, after I did my grandfather, which was vulnerable enough for me, I got my little Tommy picture from the 70s with my bowl haircut, my tie-dye t-shirt. And I go, I got you. I'm never going to leave you. It's not everything, but it helped me think about myself as a grown-up. And when I would get into these dating relationships and I'd be like, oh my God, she's never going to call me again. And this whole fear of abandonment would cause me to do things that express my insecurities in the relationship instead of like talking to other men about what I really should be working on. I think back to those pictures, like Granddad, he's got me. I've got me. I'm never going to leave me. And gosh, that did a lot to resolve that fear.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the podcast today, Tom. I really mean this when I say I'd love to have you back on and probably even book you more for an hour.
I got like 10 more chapters to write, Doc.
Okay, because there's definitely a lot more ground that I wanted to cover today that we got through, but still, I think we did pretty well overall. So just tell the audience where they can find your Substack, because I was going to talk about your Substack too. You wrote a blog recently on narcissism that was very interesting and very deep and personal too. So that was a fantastic article. But just tell people where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find your Substack and all that kind of stuff.
Seager TP, SEAGERTP. So you go to seagertp.substack.com. You'll see the narcissism. You'll see some more stories about my marriage. You'll see a little bit of cold exposure. And I'm Seager TP on Twitter. And I'm all over the place. I tweet about, engineering and the health and romance. And so if you follow me, you might be like, what is this guy about? And I'm about whatever's on my mind whatever I'm working on in my own life at the moment.
I'm sort of like that too. I when I came online, I talked a lot just about like nutrition, and then I got more into cannabis, then a little more into psychedelics, and then I did talk a little bit about COVID, but I've kind of gotten away from that now. I'm probably not going to do too much more talking about COVID. So yeah, I'm the same way. And then I talk a lot about Stoic philosophy too. So I'm just my habit is that or detriment is that I'm not interested in anything. I'm interested in everything. But
Right.
anyways, we do need to close this out. But Tom, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back again next week.
Thank you.